The night was cold, the kind that seeped into your bones no matter how many layers you wore. It was past midnight, and the towering glass walls of the company's headquarters reflected the city lights, making the entire building glow like a beacon in the dark. Inside, the air was thick with silence, except for the soft clicking of keys as Vanessa typed away at her desk. She was exhausted, but determined. She had to finish the report before morning. Vanessa had always been a hard worker. She wasn't just another employee at Sterling Enterprises. She was one of the best, smart, dedicated, and ambitious. She had worked her way up from an intern to a senior analyst in just 3 years. It wasn't easy. As a black woman in a world where power was hoarded by the elite, she had to work twice as hard just to be seen. But she never let that stop her. She believed in herself, and that was enough. At least, it had been. Then there was him, Adrian Sterling, the billionaire, the man who built an empire with ruthless precision, crushing anyone who stood in his way. He wasn't just rich. He was powerful, untouchable. He walked through the office like he owned not just the company, but the air people breathed. And when he spoke, people listened, but beneath the charm and confidence was something colder, something dangerous. Vanessa had never been the type to be intimidated by powerful men, but Adrian was different. He noticed her in a way that made her both excited and terrified. At first, it was just glances across the conference room, lingering looks when he passed her desk. Then came the late-night meetings, the casual touches, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her. It was a game, one she hadn't meant to play, but somehow she had found herself in the center of it. One night, everything changed. It was after an office gala, a night of champagne and music, where the lines between professionalism and something far more personal had blurred. He had pulled her aside, his hand warm against her wrist, his voice low as he whispered her name. One moment, she was standing at the edge of the dance floor, and the next, she was in his penthouse, lost in something she couldn't quite explain. But reality always comes crashing back. The moment she told him she was pregnant, the man who had once looked at her with desire now stared at her like she was a problem that needed to be erased. His words were sharp, emotionless. "You can't be serious." She was serious, and that was the night everything she had built crumbled. Adrian didn't just push her away, he destroyed her. Within a week, her job was gone. Security escorted her out like she was a criminal. Colleagues who had once respected her suddenly refused to meet her eyes. It was as if she had never existed. No explanations, no severance, no support, just silence. Vanessa had nothing. No job, no connections, and now a baby on the way. For 5 years she disappeared from Adrian's world. She had no choice. She had to survive, had to rebuild her life from the ground up, and she did, with resilience, with grit, with the kind of strength that no billionaire could take away from her. But fate has a way of bringing back unfinished business. Because 5 years later, at a high-profile corporate event, Adrian Sterling walked into the room and froze. There she was, and standing next to her, clutching her hand, was a little boy with his eyes. And in that moment, in front of everyone, Adrian Sterling, the man who had thought he could erase her, realized that some mistakes don't stay buried. They come back, and this time, the whole world was watching. The room was silent, a strange, suffocating kind of silence that stretched over the crowd like a thick fog. Glasses hovered mid-air, conversations hung unfinished, and eyes darted back and forth between Adrian Sterling and the woman standing across from him. Vanessa's grip on her son's hand tightened. She could feel her heart pounding. But she didn't flinch. She didn't move. Adrian, on the other hand, looked like he had seen a ghost. His sharp, composed expression wavered for the first time in years. He wasn't a man who was easily shaken. Yet here he was, standing frozen in the middle of a room full of people who were waiting to see how the powerful billionaire would react to the woman he had cast aside. Vanessa could see the questions flashing in his eyes, the realization setting in. He knew there was no denying it. The little boy beside her, with his dark wavy hair and piercing grey eyes, was his son. For a long, painful moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with history, with everything left unsaid. Then, Adrian took a step forward. "Vanessa," he said, his voice low, controlled, but there was something underneath it, something raw. She refused to let him see the storm raging inside her. She had worked too hard to let him shake her now. Lifting her chin, she met his gaze with the same quiet strength she had always carried. "Hello, Adrian," she said, her voice steady. Adrian's eyes flickered down to the boy, who was now looking up at him with innocent curiosity. "What's his name?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Vanessa hesitated, but then she said it. "Ethan." Muscle in Adrian's jaw clenched. He looked at the boy again, as if seeing himself in the small features staring back at him. Before he could say anything else, someone stepped in. "Vanessa, we need you over here," a man's voice called. It was Eric Lawson, CEO of a rising tech company and one of the most influential men in the room. He placed a protective hand on Vanessa's back, his presence a clear message. Adrian's eyes darkened. He had spent years convincing himself that Vanessa was just a mistake, a brief indulgence that had no real consequence. But now, standing here, watching another man stand beside her, he felt something he hadn't expected. Anger. "Since when did you start running in these circles?" Adrian asked, his voice edged with something unreadable. Vanessa let out a soft breath, the kind that carried both amusement and defiance. "Since I built something for myself," she replied. And she had. The last 5 years had not been easy. After Adrian had turned his back on her, Vanessa had been forced to start from nothing. No job, no money, no support. There were nights she cried herself to sleep, nights she wondered how she would afford a place to live, how she would raise a child alone. But she had refused to break. She found work where she could, took on projects, studied, learned, and built her own business from the ground up. And now she was here, not as a struggling single mother, but as a respected entrepreneur, a woman who had made a name for herself. Adrian had expected her to disappear. Instead, she had become someone he could no longer ignore, and that realization burned. "Excuse me," Vanessa said, turning away, taking Ethan's hand, and walking towards Eric and the others. She wouldn't give Adrian the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. But Adrian wasn't done. He watched her move through the crowd, watched the way people respected her, the way she belonged. This wasn't the woman he had tried to erase from his life. This was a woman who had built her own power. And for the first time in years, Adrian Sterling felt something he never had before. Regret. Later that night, as Vanessa put Ethan to bed, in their hotel suite, her hands trembled slightly as she brushed his hair back. He was everything to her strength, her reason for fighting, and now the past she had buried was clawing its way back. A knock at the door made her stomach tighten. She knew before she even opened it. Adrian stood there, his expression unreadable, his presence just as overwhelming as it had been all those years ago. "We need to talk," he said. Vanessa met his gaze, her heart pounding. She had spent 5 years preparing for this moment, and now it was here, and she wasn't sure if she was ready. Vanessa stood in the doorway, her hand gripping the frame just a little too tightly. The last thing she wanted was to let Adrian back in. Not into her home, not into her life, and certainly not into her heart. But he was here, and no matter how much she wished she could turn him away, she knew deep down that this conversation was inevitable. She exhaled slowly, stepping aside. 5 minutes, she said. Adrian nodded and stepped inside. The suite was warm, cozy, filled with traces of a life he had never been part of. A pair of tiny sneakers sat near the couch. A half-finished picture book lay open on the coffee table, and on the wall, a framed drawing caught his eye. A child's crayon sketch of a woman holding hands with a little boy. Vanessa followed his gaze. "He made that last week," she said softly. Adrian swallowed. His chest felt tight, but he pushed it down. "You should have told me." Vanessa let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Told you? The last time I trusted you, you threw me out like I was nothing. You didn't just break my heart, Adrian. You erased me. What exactly was I supposed to tell you?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration flickering across his face. "I made a mistake." She turned to him, her eyes sharp. "A mistake? You call abandoning your own child a mistake?" Adrian flinched, guilt washing over him. "I didn't." "No," he admitted, his voice lower now. "I was a coward. I was selfish. But I'm here now." Vanessa folded her arms. "And what? You think you can just walk in after 5 years and claim a place in his life? That's not how this works." Adrian exhaled, his gaze steady. "I know I can't change the past, but I want to do right by him now. And by you." She searched his face, looking for any sign that this was just another manipulation, another game. But for the first time in years, Adrian Sterling, the billionaire who controlled everything, looked uncertain, vulnerable. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned and walked to the bedroom door, peeking inside. Ethan was fast asleep, his tiny fingers curled around the blanket. Her heart ached. She had spent 5 years protecting him, shielding him from the pain of knowing his father had never wanted him. But now, for the first time, she wasn't sure if she had done the right thing. She glanced back at Adrian. "If you really want to be in his life, it's not about me, it's about him. And it's going to take more than words." Adrian nodded. "I know. Just give me a chance." Vanessa hesitated. Everything in her wanted to say no, to slam the door on this part of her past forever. But then she thought of Ethan. He deserved to know the truth. He deserved the choice she had never given him. So finally she said, "One chance. No lies. No disappearing. If you hurt him, Adrian, I swear." "I won't," he interrupted, his voice firm. "I won't." And for the first time, she almost believed him. Weeks passed, and true to his word, Adrian didn't disappear. He showed up again and again, proving to Vanessa that he wasn't the same man who had walked away all those years ago. At first, Ethan had been shy, wary of the stranger, who suddenly wanted to know him. But slowly, the walls began to break. There were little moments, like the time Adrian taught Ethan how to throw a baseball, or the way his face lit up when his son laughed. Moments that Vanessa never thought she'd see. Moments she didn't realize she had missed. And then, one evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset, Ethan turned to Adrian and said, "Are you my dad?" Vanessa's heart stopped. She hadn't prepared for this. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Adrian did. "Yes," he said softly. "I am." Ethan studied him, his small face serious. "You left." Adrian's throat tightened. I did, he admitted, and I was wrong. But I'm here now, and I want to be your dad, if you'll let me. Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then, to Vanessa's surprise, he scooted closer to Adrian and rested his head against his arm. "Okay," he whispered. Vanessa felt something inside her crack, and just like that, the past no longer mattered. Because in the end, it wasn't about forgiveness or redemption. It wasn't about pain or regret. It was about the future. The one thing they still had the power to change. And this time, none of them were walking away.